Hi everyone, my name is Emily Newborough and I am the social media rep for PsychI. And I'm here today with Dr. Stiegler-Balfour, who is a cognitive psychologist who does a lot of research on campus. And we're here to talk about research psychology. Dr. SB, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Sure, Emily. Thank you so much for having me. As Emily mentioned, my name is Dr. Jennifer Stiegler-Balfour, and I'm a cognitive psychologist by training. I do research on applied questions of human memory and cognition, and specifically right now I'm interested in looking at how um, college age students, but also older adults transition to reading on digital devices. So we have a lot of interesting research projects ongoing in our lab right now. And I typically have about 4 or 5 research assistants working with me every semester, doing all different kinds of things, starting from recruiting participants, running participants, but also contributing to new research ideas. And then once those come to fruition, right? Once we finish data collection, we get to present them at conferences, sometimes even national and international conferences. And then some of my students also get to publish peer-reviewed articles with me. And I started working at the University of New England 12 years ago. And yeah, I've been loving it. I feel like doing research with undergraduates is one of my favorite things of my job. And it's something that I really enjoy. And my favorite thing about it is really seeing students grow as they're involved in research. Obviously, I see that in a classroom too, but I think it's even more rewarding working more closely with students one-on-one, developing new research ideas and putting together the research materials and then collecting data, analyzing data, and seeing how it clicks for them and how they kind of finally see why they had to take statistics. And um, it's of course also amazing when they get to present and show what they've done to an audience and publish their findings. So yeah, it's one of my favorite things. So yeah, I think that's kind of me. I got my PhD in 2010 from the University of New Hampshire in cognitive psychology. But yeah, I'd love to talk more about, what it means to have a career in academia or research. So ask your questions, Emily.
Perfect. So my very first question for you is, what are the options for somebody graduating with a BA or BS in psychology who is interested in research?
That's an excellent question. So if you are earning your BA or BS in psychology and you want to pursue a career in research, you have a couple of options. Some students decide that they want to apply maybe for a higher degree right away, a master's or PhD. And maybe others might decide that they want to maybe take a gap year or two and maybe work in another research lab. So assuming somebody has maybe already worked in a lab while they were at UNE as an undergrad, right? That will look really good on their resume and they will already have a good amount of experience under their belt. So that will make them a more qualified candidate when they're applying to other research labs across the country. So getting some more experience, maybe as a lab supervisor or just working in somebody else's laboratory will really be helpful, and that can help you build a career. So you could become a lab technician and do that work, I guess as a career. But most students, I would say, that want to pursue career go on to get either a master's or a PhD long term. So working in a research lab, for a year or two would really help you build your resume to then be eligible to apply to graduate school. Also would help you gain more experience, make connections with other researchers in the field. Um, so yeah, I would say it's a stepping stone typically with a bachelor's if you are in a lab, but people can certainly also make careers of that. So if you wanted to pursue research where you're the person actually coming up with the ideas and creating new knowledge, you would obviously have to go get a higher degree. At minimum, you would have to get a master's degree, but most likely, if you want to become a researcher, you would want to get a PhD. So a PhD, right, it could be in different fields. Let's say you're interested in psychology specifically, you could still pick, are you interested in cognitive psychology, social psychology, developmental psychology, clinical psychology, right? You would have to pick a field and then you would do your research in that particular area. The PsyD is also something that people have heard of, but most of the time it's not associated with research. It's actually a more applied degree. It takes the same amount of time as a PhD, but it's more focused on clinical and applied work. So less research and sometimes even no research at all. So that's really the primary difference. If you're interested specifically in research, you would definitely want to pursue the PhD or at minimum a master's and really focus on a program that has research as part of that, because some master's programs are more applied, others are more research focused.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. My next question for you would be like, how do I start looking for a degree? And you mentioned a little bit about the different areas that I could go into for research, but which kind of degrees are there within the field?
Yes, that's a great question. So I had already mentioned the master's, so that could be either an MA or an MS. So depending on that, the program that you're interested in, it might be more science-based, so it's an MS. Probably for neuroscience, that would be an MS. And then for psychology, it is most likely going to be an MA. So those are options. There are obviously limits what you can do with an MA or MS in the field of research. So if you want to be the creator of new knowledge and be a principal investigator of a lab, most likely you would want to pursue a PhD in any given field within psychology. And to help you decide which one of these to choose, I would suggest really thinking about your why, right? What is your dream job? And maybe find people out there that you can maybe interview or at least research online and see what degree do they have. Because I think a lot of times people just think, well, a PhD is the highest degree available in that field, so that's what I want to pursue. But you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do with it? Really, the only time where a PhD makes sense is if you want to go into academia or you want to do research, sometimes in the industry. But traditionally, the PhD is for people who want to do research as part of their job description. And if you want to be more applied, right, if you want to do counseling, a master's can be just as good, and a PhD is not needed. So I would really recommend that you really think about what it is that you want to do. Number one, psychology is a very diverse field, right? There's many different areas. If you're studying nursing, you're going to become a nurse, right? You can obviously specialize in different fields as well, but psychology is not as linear because, you could go into business, you can go into education, you can go into politics. It has many different options, so it's not quite as straightforward. So you really have to do more thinking and educating yourself and some research on what's possible with a degree in psychology, and then really think about what is it that what is it that you want to do when you're done, and then that will determine what degree you should pursue. So
Okay.
I hope, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And as just an example for the people watching, which degree or path did you choose and why?
Yes, that's a good question. So I have a PhD in cognitive psychology. And when I was an undergrad, I initially thought I was going to go into clinical psychology, did an internship, and really realized that maybe that wasn't so much for me. And, I felt a little bit lost, to be honest, initially, because that was always my dream. And then I remember I took a research methods class and I just really realized how much I loved doing research. So then I also, reading about different research, I realized that cognition was something that was of interest to me. So I pursued my project and research methods in a project on cognitive psychology. And really from that point on, I knew I wanted to go into research and specifically into academia, where I would both be able to teach and do research as part of my job. Um, and then as an undergrad, once I knew that I wanted to pursue a PhD, I try to get as much research experience as I could, and try to make strong connections with my professors as an undergrad, because I knew that I was going to ask them for recommendation letters, and I really wanted to also learn from them what it's like to be in academia. And then, yeah, I decided to apply for PhD programs right out of undergrad. I know some students will first do a master's and then get a PhD. In my case, I was actually an international student when I was doing my undergraduate work. So I didn't have the option to apply for financial aid. So from a financial perspective, it made more sense for me to apply for PhD programs, because I knew that if it was a respectable program, that there would be a stipend and a tuition waiver involved, whereas that's not always available for master's programs. And I knew I couldn't take out any loans. So yeah, that's why I decided to try to apply for the PhD programs right away. Although I know nowadays, sometimes a master's is actually beneficial, right? It will increase your chances of getting into the PhD program. So both of those paths are acceptable. But like I said, I decided to go for the PhD right away, just because I knew that's what I ultimately wanted to get. And for my financial reasons, it made more sense for me to do it that way.
Okay. What were the benefits of choosing this route, or even getting a degree that had some element of research to it?
Yeah. Um, that's a really good question, because I think that um, I love what I do, but I love actually having kind of a mix of things that I do, where I get to teach and be in the classroom, but then also do research and really pursue my own research interests. And I love having that mix of both. So I think that for me, it was a good choice. It's what I wanted to do. Um, but yeah, so I think that was kind of my why, and why I decided to go for the PhD. I feel like there was a second part to your question that I forget now, but could you tell me again?
Yeah. So the second part of my previous question was, what are some of the benefits of having a degree which has a research basis?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think that depending on what area you go into, in academia, most of the time you get to choose your own research area, right? I get to have the opportunity to research what interests me, right? I get to guide that. Obviously, I have training in memory and cognition, so that's obviously my starting point. But I can pursue research questions that personally interest me. And what I did while I was pursuing my PhD was research on reading comprehension. But I feel like over time, right, my research area has changed, right? I'm interested in more applied questions nowadays than when I was in graduate school. They were more, basic research question that maybe didn't have so much application in the real world. So it's definitely shifted, but I get to do that, right, for a living, which I think is amazing and a benefit. Um, if you work in the industry or for a company, most of the time they're going to tell you what you have to research. So it's not maybe, it can't be as creative, I guess, because you don't get to pursue your own research interests, but you get to pursue the research that the company wants you to pursue. But there's pros and cons to both of those things, I think. And I also love that working in academia allows me to not just do research, but also do administrative work, right? I've been the assistant academic director, so I also do administrative work. And then I also teach. So I feel like I get a variety of different things. There's always opportunities to learn new skills and kind of constantly, develop and learn new skills. And that's something that's really appealing to me.
Okay, thank you. What is something that you wish you knew when you were an undergrad, when you were applying for graduate school?
Yes. I remember that being really stressful, right? I mean, you're under a lot of pressure and you feel like this is going to determine the rest of your life. So I remember that being challenging, right? And I was really thankful for having the mentorship of professors at my undergraduate institution. And Some of the things that they taught me or told me that were really helpful to me was that when you're applying for graduate school, it's not like applying for undergrad, right? You're really applying to work with a person, not so much applying to the school. At least for most programs, I would say that's true, especially PhD programs. Um, so again, asking yourself about your whys, like what is it that you want to study, right? You need to have some idea, maybe not super specific, but you need to know what area you want to go into. So that's the first question, right? Do you want to be a clinician? Do you want to go into school psychology, social psychology, etc.? So you need to figure that out. And then what I would recommend is maybe even if you've read papers, and you're like, wow, that's a really cool paper, that's a really cool topic that I would like to study more, look up the authors of the paper and see what schools they're at. Do they accept students, right, in their lab? Do they have labs, obviously, and do they accept students? And that's how you maybe might find individuals that you would be interested in working with. You could, of course, also look for schools. Maybe you're limited to a geographic region. You can kind of look at different schools and what they have for programs that interest you, and take it from there. So there's many different ways that you can approach looking for programs, but either looking for people that do what you're interested in or looking for universities, but keeping in mind that, right, when you have a faculty advisor in a PhD program, they're the primary person that you're going to be working with. So it's less about the program than working with that individual. So make sure that what they're doing interests you and that you feel like you would be a good match being in their lab. And again, right, asking yourself again, do I need the PhD because I want to pursue a career in research or academia? Or am I just pursuing it because I feel like I should, right? I feel like a lot of times people think now that's the next step. Like you get your BA and then the next thing you do is getting your master's or your PhD, but that's not always the case. But thinking about the job market, thinking about what you actually want to do when you're done, would that be a career that can fulfill you for, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years? Right, is an important question to ask yourself. Thinking about the money, right? If you have any student debt, can you pay that back with the salary that you would be getting with a particular job? Obviously, don't pick a job based on the salary, but it's an important consideration, I think. And are there going to be job openings? One thing to consider if you want to go into academia is that we're kind of getting closer and closer to that demographic cliff where there were fewer children born that are now, starting college. So there's actually fewer positions in academia, right? They've been really, when people retire, they've maybe not been rehiring new professors. So there's probably going to be fewer opportunities in academia in the future, and it's already happening now. That's something to consider. So if you are deciding you want to pursue a PhD, actually looking when you're interviewing for programs at people, graduates, recent graduates from the program, what kind of jobs are they accepting? Are they all going into academia? And how successful are they at applying? Or do you also have the option to go into the industry and work in a different sector? The more diverse your options, but the better off you are, right? Because you want to make sure you get a job. And the truth really is that there's a lot of PhDs out there, right? People who pursued PhDs and are now struggling to get jobs in academia because there's just not as many jobs available. And really working as an adjunct is paid pretty poorly, right? Where you're not a full-time employee, you just teach a class here and there at different universities. That's something to think about, right? You don't want to just blindly go into something, but you want to really think about what you can do with the degree and if there are going to be jobs available. And ideally, you want to pursue a degree that gives you multiple options. That would really be my strong recommendation. That wasn't really so much something that I thought about when I applied. But also the job market looked a little bit different at the time. But when I now advise students, I always tell them find programs where you have multiple paths that you can take upon graduation. Asking, for this particular program, how successful are people actually getting jobs afterwards? Sometimes they have an alumni page, for instance, or you can ask those questions if you're being interviewed. But yeah, those are important considerations. Some of them I considered when I applied. Some of them I feel like are newer, so are not things that I considered. But if I were to go back, I think because I was a little, I was anxious and I was, just like you want to apply to enough schools to make sure that you're getting in. I knew it was competitive, so I feel like I applied to a lot of schools, but then looking back, there were probably a handful where I probably wouldn't have wanted to go because I feel like either the program or the PI that I applied to work with wasn't the greatest match, or maybe geographically, the location of the university wouldn't have been ideal, and or I wouldn't have wanted to live in that part of the country. Or another thing to consider is usually the stipend that you get for PhD programs is the same for most schools, but depending on the geographic region that you're in, you might get a lot more out of that money compared to other locations. So, it's very different if you're getting the same stipend and you're living in New Hampshire versus if you get the same stipend and you live in Washington, D.C. or in New York, right, where cost of living is much higher. So that's also something to consider. So making a list and really doing all the research and thinking about, would I actually go there, right? Either the program, the person I'd be working with, or could I afford being there if I was accepted? And if the answer is no, then don't spend the $70 on the application fee. It's expensive, right? Don't waste that money. So coming up with a realistic list, right, where you have some, safe schools where you feel like you're, it's a pretty, you have a pretty good chance of being accepted, maybe some reach schools where you don't know if you'll be accepted, and then maybe some that maybe are not ideal, but really thinking long and hard. If you were accepted, would you really go there? If the answer is no, don't even bother applying. So yeah, it's again, it comes down to also cost, right? Because applying can get pretty expensive, right? Taking the GREs, if they're required, you get to send them to so many schools, but past that point, you pay for each score that you're sending. So there's a lot of costs involved. So you really want to come up with a realistic list of schools. So yeah, I think that would kind of cover most of the considerations.
Perfect. And to sum up everything that we've talked about so far today, what would be your biggest piece of advice to someone who's thinking of this career path?
Okay, yes. Yeah, so I think my biggest recommendation would be, if you're thinking at all about going to graduate school, start doing the research early on, right? Don't wait until your senior year. I mean, if that's the position that you're in, that's okay. Don't panic, right? There's still time. You could even take a gap year. And really do your research, right? Thinking about your why, like what degree would be the best fit. Remembering that applying to grad school is different from applying to undergrad. Talking with your professors, right? We are a resource. We're here for you, and we're here to help guide you in that choice. And really, digging into figuring out the different programs, what's required. Ideally, of course, if you want to go to grad school, you should get involved in research at UNE. We have some amazing opportunities, so I would highly recommend that. And setting yourself up for success when you're applying, right? Obviously, keeping your GPA up, getting involved in research. Maybe if you're looking to get into a more applied program, right, doing more internships. So doing all the things that you need to do, building strong relationships with your professors, so you can then ask them for recommendation letters and they actually know who you are and actually have a lot to say about you. Those are all things that you should be thinking about, ideally early on in your college career. And then once it really comes down to looking at specific schools that you want to apply to, look at the financial aid at the various programs. Again, that's something to consider. can you actually afford going there, right? Do they have a tuition waiver? Do they have maybe a research or a teaching assistantship that could help you pay for things? And weeding out schools that really wouldn't financially be possible for you without taking on huge amounts of debt. Making sure you pick a reputable program. In general, I mean, I can't say it just as a blanket statement, but in general, be cautious with completely online universities. Sometimes they're just cash grabs, right? Where the degree that you would get from that institution is usually not very highly regarded, right? If it's a degree in psychology that you're pursuing, you want to make sure it's APA approved and accredited. That's also important. Making sure you take your GREs or any other admissions tests that are needed. I did mention the asking for letters and your professors, but again, the most important thing is really thinking about your why. And like I said, if you have to take a gap year, that's perfectly fine. The last thing you would want is rushing into a graduate program and then a year or two later realizing that that's not what you want. So really thinking about what you want to do and then applying and doing the research, I think is the ideal scenario. And when in doubt, I would take a gap year and figure those things out and then apply to graduate school. It's much better than finding yourself down a road with something that you didn't really want.
Perfect.
So yeah, I think that kind of sums it up.
Thank you. Thank you so much for meeting with me today and taking some time out of your day to do this. I really appreciate it. And I'm pretty sure anybody who's watching is really appreciating it as well.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. And just keep in mind that all the professors at UNE we're here to help you, right? Our door is always open, maybe not literally these days, but you can email us and set up a meeting, and we're happy to guide you and help you navigate the graduate school process. It's hard, right? It can be overwhelming, but we're here to help you. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right.
If anybody watching and you have any more questions, you can just email us at unepsychi@gmail.com and we'll get back to you. Please make sure to check out our other videos for other areas of psychology that you or grad school that may be interesting to you. Thank you.